Good afternoon, everyone. This is Randy Pfizer, the CEO for the American Society of Interior Designers. I'd like to welcome you to ASAD's bi-monthly Public Policy Webinar series presented by the ASAD Government and Public Affairs Department. We are very excited about this webinar, and ASAD believes that to be good advocates for interior design, we must be informed on all public policy issues that affect or are affected by interior designers and the industry. That's why every other month, ASAD is committed to bringing you public policy content relevant to the industry and profession. Today's webinar is eligible for 0.1 credit of continuing education through IDCEC. This afternoon, we present FEMA Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, who we are and how we serve. The presentation will be guest hosted by the Federal Emergency Management Association's agencies, ODIC Director Linda Mastandri. Linda serves as the Director of Office of Disability Integration and Coordination with FEMA. The office leads FEMA's commitment to whole community emergency management by integrating individuals with disabilities and others with access and functional needs into all aspects of disaster preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. Linda has spent her career as an attorney concentrating her practice in disability law and civil rights, representing people with disabilities who have experienced discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, and government services and benefits. Linda has built a reputation as a subject matter expert on inclusive emergency management practices. She has provided training, consultation, and technical assistance to emergency managers around the nation and presented at the National Homeland Security Conference, the Texas Homeland Security Conference, and the Florida Governor's Hurricane Conference, the Illinois Emergency Management Association Conference, and a NEMA webinar. From 1990 to 1999, Linda represented the United States 7 times in wheelchair, track, and international competition, including 2 Paralympic Games, winning 15 gold and 5 silver medals. She set national, world, and Paralympic records numerous times. Linda is the first female Paralympian inducted into both the Chicagoland Sports Hall of Fame and the National Italian-American Sports Hall of Fame. She currently serves as chairperson of the International Paralympic Committee Legal and Ethics Committee. All of your lines are muted, but if you have questions, please use the question box function during the presentation, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the program. The question and answer session will be facilitated by ASAD's Vice President of Government and Public Affairs, Brian Sukup. And without further delay, ASAD would like to welcome FEMA's Linda Mastandria, to the presentation. I'll turn it over to you, Linda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Mastandria, and I am the Director of FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, as you've already heard. I'd like to thank ASID for the opportunity to speak with all of you today about the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination and how we serve. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you how we work together across the federal government, states, with the local governments, tribes and territories, NGOs, and private sector partners to better serve people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters, and how I hope that we can effectively work together to do the same. So today we're going to share a lot of information with you. I hope you'll find it informative and useful. I'm going to talk with you briefly about FEMA's mission and our strategic plan to set the stage for the discussion of the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination's role, our strategic plan and goals. And in addition, I'll share some of the really exciting initiatives that we've got going on with different program areas across FEMA, and then we'll have some time to take your questions at the end. So as you can see here, we have FEMA's mission up on the screen. And FEMA's mission, you know, FEMA has a big job. As an organization, we're continuing to learn and develop new and better ways to serve people. And as part of that effort, over the last couple of years, FEMA went through an extensive planning process to develop a strategic plan and to refine its mission. And so its mission, it's quite simple. It's helping people before, during, and after disasters. So it's quite simple, but it's really quite powerful in its implementation. And so let's talk about how that mission is being implemented. So FEMA has a strategic plan that came out of that intensive process that really governs how we're providing service through 2022. This plan has 3 overarching goals. First, to build a culture of preparedness. Second, to ready the nation for catastrophic disaster. And third, to reduce the complexity of FEMA. And so, you know, every segment of our society, from individual to government, industry to philanthropy, has to be empowered with the information it needs to prepare for the impacts of future disasters, right? And that's really what this building a culture of preparedness is all about. It's everyone recognizing their role, their responsibility, and their piece in making sure that we as a nation are prepared for disasters. In terms of readying the nation for catastrophic disasters, the goal here is to work with our partners across all levels of government to strengthen partnerships and to really create scalable capabilities to meet the needs of what we have seen are, can be really overwhelming incidents, right? We know that disasters are increasing in frequency and tempo and severity, and so this is a really key piece of the strategic plan. And the third is reducing the complexity of FEMA. So any of you on the phone today who have dealt with, whether it's a local government office, a state or a federal office, you know that one of the things that we can pretty universally agree on is that these often are large bureaucratic engines that we can find very difficult to navigate and to deal with, to get answers from, to get the resources that we need, to get the services that we need. And so really what this piece is about is making FEMA an easier partner to deal with, right? We want people to be able to engage with us easier, to get the help that they need to recover sooner and better. So now I want to take you through how the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination used these 3 goals from FEMA's strategic plan to set the foundation for our own office's plan. So this might look a little bit familiar to you because you've seen something like it just in the last couple of minutes. The Office of Disability Integration and Coordination is part of FEMA, right? And we have part of FEMA's full job, but our part is helping people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. That is the mission of my office. And disability integration as a concept didn't always exist in FEMA. It wasn't really until after Katrina hit Louisiana and the Gulf that the emergency management profession started to realize, hey, we really need to do better when it comes to serving people with disabilities, because what we're doing is not meeting the mark right now. So the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act, or PCEMRA, as the acronym is, created this position within FEMA called a disability coordinator. And that position was created to advise the FEMA administrator on issues relating to serving people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. And a couple years after the appointment or the creation of that position, the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination was created because there came a recognition that this one individual could not be all things to all people, have all the answers, provide all the resources. And so an office was stood up around that individual to start to develop what this program would look like in terms of helping FEMA help people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. And so currently, I hold both the Disability Coordinator title for FEMA, and I am the Director of FEMA's Office of Disability Integration and Coordination. I hold both roles. They really are very much intertwined in terms of role, responsibility, and function. The Disability Coordinator function exists solely to advise the administrator, and then the director of the office really exists to implement programs and policies across FEMA. So for the first time ever, my office engaged in our own strategic planning process, and we developed our own goals for the 2019 to 2022 timeframe to align with FEMA's strategic plan and those 3 goals that I walked you through. And so I want to talk with you about those now. So the mission of my office, again, helping people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. Again, simple, but a really powerful, and vital mission. And our vision, it's pretty lofty. It's a world in which the self-determination of people with disabilities is respected in all aspects of public life, and people with disabilities are engaged in the development of policies, programs, and the design of public facilities. And so this vision really looks at creating that world that we're talking about, where people with disabilities are engaged in every facet of public life. They are engaged in their communities. They are able to take advantage of public and private spaces to play and to work and to be with their families and friends, and that there are no artificial exclusions, right, based on physical or any other kind of barrier. Now, you may think that's a kind of a lofty vision, and sure, it kind of is, but I think we are uniquely positioned to help advance this vision when you look at some of the programs and services that FEMA is engaged in every day, and we will get into those as I go through the presentation. So I want to set the stage for you a little bit before I get into our specific strategic plan goals and the initiatives supporting these goals. I came onto this job on Labor Day of 2017, smack in the middle of Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So we were kind of a little bit busy at that time. We had a lot going on, and the interesting thing, though, is through that season, we learned an awful lot from those hurricanes and from the way we were providing service across FEMA and out in the community during that season. And we learned that we had been isolating disability competency into this disability integration cadre, which is what we call our deployable force of people who go out and serve in active disasters. They're called cadres. And we had, one single disability integration program office at headquarters. And so we kind of learned that we were really siloing all of this expertise and knowledge in one single place, and that we were having to be all things to all people when it came to people with disabilities, even when it wasn't necessarily something that had anything to do with our office or our roles or responsibilities. And so we decided that we really had to find a different way, that we had to do better, and we had to figure out a way to integrate that competency across the agency and to build our capacity as an agency to serve people with disabilities so that it wasn't just housed in this one office. And we recognized through, this self-evaluation, if you will, that the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination is a part of FEMA, right? It's not a standalone agency. And so we needed to create a plan for our office that, when it was implemented, would not only allow us to achieve our goals, but to help FEMA as an organization achieve its goals as well. And so we talked about those 3 strategic goals of FEMA's, right? Building a culture of preparedness, readying the nation for catastrophic disaster, and reducing the complexity of FEMA. And those 3 are really meant to be cross-cutting, wide-ranging goals meant to help not only FEMA do its job better, but to really look critically at how we can build the nation's capacity as a whole to not only survive catastrophic disaster, but to thrive after it, returning to communities that can be rebuilt even stronger and better than before, with affordable, accessible housing, public transportation, and other infrastructure to support the needs of that community, and universally designed, livable space where people want to be each and every day. That is the overarching goal of FEMA's strategic plan. And all of us together play a part in making that happen. And so now I want to take you through how the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination is helping to build that culture of preparedness that we're talking about. So first, we really want to support data-driven decision-making and planning for people with disabilities across all phases of emergency management. And so, what does that mean exactly, right? And how do we do it? I mean, these were questions that we struggled with for quite some time. And, we've known as an agency and as an office for some time, based on wholly anecdotal evidence, that people with disabilities often are impacted by disasters at a higher rate than those without disabilities. And it kind of makes sense, right? And we've had anecdotal evidence as well that suggests that those same people have a harder time and take even longer to recover from disasters than households where no one has a disability. But we haven't had the hard data that we needed to fully understand the true nature of the problem or to create a measured way forward to solve it. And at the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, we recognized that this was a significant gap, and we continue to look for ways to improve how we do business. And so a couple of months ago, we had the good fortune to hire our first data analytics specialist to help us get accurate data on people with disabilities impacted by disasters. And those of us who work in any arena dealing with data, you know how challenging it can be to get good data. And when it comes to getting data on people with disabilities, honestly, there are so many varied and wide-ranging sources of where the information comes from Social Security, from unemployment, from states, from Health and Human Services, from Medicaid, from Medicare, from NGOs working in the space. So there's different definitions and there's different ways of collecting the data, so you can never be sure that you're really getting an accurate picture. And so that makes it exceptionally difficult, right, to meaningfully plan or to include people with disabilities in planning, in training, in exercise efforts, or to really understand the size and scope of the population that we're dealing with. And so what's really exciting for me is that my data analyst is working on some projects, including what we're calling the first ever disability metrics report, which will help us to, number one, better identify, and two, understand the impacted populations of people with disabilities in disasters. So that is really key, and we are hoping that this document, A, it's going to be a living, breathing document that will continuously be updated, but B, we want to make it available to our state, local, and tribal and territorial partners so that when they're dealing with an active disaster in their area, they can get some really solid first-hand knowledge of who the people are in their jurisdiction that are impacted so that they can better prepare to help them. And so that's really exciting. The other really cool thing that my data analyst is working on is updates to how we register people for FEMA assistance. There's this question that deals with disabilities in our registration process that helps people with disabilities identify themselves and their needs during the registration process for federal disaster assistance. And we used to have a very clunky, difficult worded question. It was hard for people to understand. It was hard for people to answer. And we knew it was a problem because we weren't getting good data in terms of the population of people with disabilities who were impacted by the disaster. So we were able to change the question so that people are more accurately able to identify, A, that they have a disability, and B, what those needs are as a result of their disability. And it's resulted in a tremendous increase in the people who are self-identifying as people with disabilities in our registration process. It's gone up from a little over 2% to almost 15%. which is amazing. And that's really going to allow us to better capture and serve the true population of people with disabilities who've been impacted by a particular disaster. And we know that we're on the right track because that 15% tracks really with what we know is coming out of the American Community Survey data on people with disabilities, which hovers at right around an average of 15%. So we're really excited about that. And the key piece, in addition to helping FEMA do our job better, it's going to allow our state and local and territorial, tribal, our NGO, our private sector partners to have better information that will drive better decision making when it comes to serving people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. So to me, that is just super exciting because we can't serve people we don't know about, right? And so we are getting so much closer to really identifying that impacted population, and it's just going to make a tremendous difference. So the second piece of this goal is maturing what we're calling the community advisory group concept. And this is something that started with our staff, our disability integration staff in the regions within the last several years, where the idea is to get emergency managers and disability stakeholder organizations together in a room so that they can work together, they can get to know each other, they can work together, and the disability stakeholder organizations can identify their needs and challenges to the emergency managers so that together they can come up with ways to solve those challenges. And so again, that premise is getting the disability stakeholders, the emergency managers, NGOs in the community, private sector partners together so that they can plan and prepare for their communities, right, to more effectively serve people with disabilities in disaster. If they're not talking, right, if an emergency manager doesn't know what their population of people with disabilities is or what the unique mix is, say we've got a facility where people with Alzheimer's are living, or say we've got a group home for people with developmental disabilities, or we have an unusually high population of people who are deaf in a particular community. If an emergency manager doesn't know that, they can't plan to help meet those needs during a disaster. So the goal of this community advisory group concept is to get all of those folks together to help them start the process of working together so that they become trusted partners in each other's lives. The emergency managers know, hey, we can count on these folks to come exercise and plan and train with us, and that we are confident that we can serve them the best way possible when there's a disaster. And so that's the goal of that. We've hired a capacity building analyst as well. So this is another key and exciting hire for my office who's going to work on this project as well as other stakeholder engagement projects. And she's really going to help us to build better partnerships and work more collaboratively to result in better outcomes for all people with disabilities. And the third piece of this goal is we want to advance the concept of universal design as a measure to increase whole community resilience. And we recognize that building accessible communities is important for a host of reasons. And we are working day in and out to advance that discussion, to partner with individuals and organizations working in the universal design space, like the people on the phone today, like all of you, to really begin to rethink how we rebuild communities after disasters, to be accessible, to be sustainable, and to be resilient for everyone. When you look at the extreme damage that Puerto Rico suffered, the extreme devastation in Paradise, California after the wildfires, these are unique opportunities really from the ground up to rebuild communities in an accessible, resilient, and sustainable way. So I think this is an exciting opportunity for folks in your field. It's an exciting opportunity for folks in the disability space, and really anyone who's interested in building sustainable and resilient communities to come together, and to really figure out how to make these spaces livable and usable and great spaces for everyone. And so that's kind of a really exciting initiative that we're starting to work on as well. So next, FEMA's next goal is preparing the nation for catastrophic disasters. So we know we got some work to do on this one. As I mentioned a while ago, and it's not news to anybody on the call, hurricanes and wildfires are more frequent and more deadly. And earthquakes and tornadoes continue to get more powerful. And so we know they're not going away, right? And so we have to figure out what we can do to be better prepared for them when they come, and to ensure people with disabilities can survive them and have well-built, integrated communities to return to with safe, accessible, and affordable housing. And to achieve that goal, we're working to integrate disability competency as an element of our training systems in FEMA and what's called the National Qualification System. And these are the systems of qualifications that people in the emergency management space work their way through to become qualified practitioners of whether it's disability integration, individual assistance, public assistance, whatever the emergency management program is. But we have been working with these program areas to ensure that disability competency is an element of everybody's training. So again, it gets us away from this notion of siloed expertise that just the Office of Disability Integration or somebody with disability in their title, has any knowledge or expertise when it comes to serving people with disabilities. We want every emergency manager to know that they have responsibilities when it comes to people with disabilities. And that's what improving this competency across the agency is about. We are also really working to support collaboration with our local, state, and national stakeholders to learn from each other, to share innovative strategies and tools that folks are developing to better serve disaster survivors with disabilities during all phases of emergency management. And we recognize, FEMA does not hold hold all the cards on developing this expertise. We know there's a lot of great stuff happening out there, and so what we really want to do is improve our engagement across the emergency management spectrum and the NGO spectrum and with our private sector partners as well, just to see what it is that people are doing that's cool and innovative and that's really going to work to improve the lives of people with disabilities, and see how we can work together on that. And one of the things that we're doing internally to improve on that front is refreshing a course that we had offered in the past called Integrating the Needs of People with Disabilities into Emergency Planning. Now, this class used to be a 2-day class, and it was pretty lecture-based, and it was more, honestly, it was more aimed at creating that community advisory concept that I talked to you about a few minutes ago. And what we recognized that was really needed was a course that would allow people who are doing emergency plans, emergency operations plans, to test their capabilities against a set of real-world requirements so that they actually know they're on the right track with their plans. And of course, a plan is a piece of paper, right? It has to get implemented to mean anything. But if you don't have a good foundation and an understanding of who your community is and what their needs are to even begin to plan for them, you can't implement in a meaningful way. And so this course is going to give emergency managers real practical information to take back about their plans to help them identify gaps and give them real-world solutions to fix those gaps so that they can implement a really well-thought-out, executed plan that will serve their whole community in disasters, including people with disabilities. And we want to also support outcome-driven recovery. We're looking at developing metrics to measure programmatic outcomes for disaster survivors with disabilities. And this is something that we haven't been great at capturing in the past, and this is probably no surprise to you given what I talked to you about a little bit ago about the fact that mostly we've lived in the world of anecdotes, right? We haven't had hard data to help us drive our decisions. So we haven't been really good at capturing what happens to survivors with disabilities. We don't know if they get back into their communities, if they return home, if they have to move. Do they get into accessible housing? Do they go back to work or school? Are their services and supports restored? We've gotten lots of anecdotal evidence on these things, but we hadn't really gotten a solid way to measure what successful recovery looks like for people with disabilities. And now that I have a data analytics analyst on the team, we're starting to be able to look at questions like this and come up with the ways to get answers. And this will help not only FEMA, but the emergency management profession as a whole to do better when we can figure out what successful disaster recovery looks like for people with disabilities. And I feel like the people on the call today have an absolute role to play in this. When you look at, part of what we're analyzing is how people return to community. And you all are on the front lines of designing that space. So I think there's really an integral relationship here in how people are recovering and the role you guys can play in helping, drive successful recovery from disaster for people with disabilities, as well as the whole community. And the third goal, as we mentioned, is reducing the complexity of FEMA and, turning this bureaucratic behemoth into something that people can really deal with, right? We want to streamline the experience for people with disabilities, and everyone, quite honestly. I mean, my office's role, of course, and focus is people with disabilities, but we really want to make it easier for everyone. And it's really important, right, to make it easier for people who have had some of the worst days of their lives, right? They've been impacted by a disaster. They've potentially lost everything. So why do we want to make it harder, right? We want to make it easier for people who've been impacted by disasters to apply for assistance and to navigate the programs and services that we provide. And so at the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination, what that means is we want to improve our registration intake process, which I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. We want to ensure that people with disabilities can get the accommodations they need to register, to participate in FEMA programs and services, and to make it easier to get the questions they have answered and to get the information they need along the way. And that's really key because we know, people, again, they're living out their worst days. We don't want to make it harder. We really want to make it easier for them. One of the really exciting developments in this arena that has come out of the implementation of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. And I'm not sure if anyone on the phone is familiar with that, but it sets out, several dozen requirements, and two keys of this act benefit survivors with disabilities in particular and will help them recover sooner and better than before. And the two key provisions to be aware of, and I'm not going to bore you with the section numbers or anything like that, but I can get more particulars if people want them. But if a survivor has damage to accessibility-related real property, like a ramp or a lift to their home, for example, repairing or replacing that item will be exempt from the current financial assistance cap. And this is a huge difference from before, because what this means in real life is that individual with a disability now does not have to make a choice between repairing their roof and repairing or replacing their ramp that will allow them to access their home. Because FEMA assistance, for those of you who aren't aware, it's capped at $34,000 and some change for personal property and for real property, right? And so you can imagine if somebody's roof blows off and their ramp is destroyed and it takes $5 or $10 grand to repair or replace the ramp, and then, in the past they'd only have $20,000 or $10,000 left to repair their roof, which wasn't enough. So now those accessibility-related improvements are exempt from that $34,000 max cap, which is really going to make a huge difference in how people with disabilities are able to recover from disaster. And mind you, FEMA assistance was never meant to make anybody whole, right? It's the payer of last resort after insurance and everything else. We understand that. But this is just going to open the door to really helping people with disabilities get that extra mile in terms of their recovery. So that's really exciting. The other key piece here is that we want to work better with the individual assistance program area within FEMA. And the individual assistance is the program area that registers people. It's the area that provides temporary rental assistance. It's the program area that puts people up in hotels for a period of time. It's the area that provides money for your lost personal property, your clothing, your furniture, your medicines, your medical needs, things like that. And so we want to, as an office, really improve how we work with that program area to improve the experience for people with disabilities in everything from that registration process to moving through every program area, whether it's temporary housing or, getting their clothing, reimbursed or new furniture, and to ultimately, moving back into the community and successfully reintegrating into the community. And then finally, we want to work with our public assistance program. And public assistance is where the bulk of FEMA dollars are spent. It's a reimbursement program that funds the rebuild or repair of public infrastructure, right? And so this is why I was talking about, like, the key here, when you're looking at rebuilding of Puerto Rico and Paradise and other, it doesn't even have to be that catastrophic, right? Public assistance comes into play in many less severe disasters. But the point is, working with public assistance, we are going to be better able to ensure that projects that are built or rebuilt using those funds are built in an accessible, sustainable, and resilient way that will be inclusive for everyone in that community. And this is better for people with disabilities, naturally, but it's better for all of us, right? To be able to use public spaces side by side with our neighbors, whether they're a person with a disability, a senior, or a young parent with small children. So this is really important. And again, where I think folks on this call will have a really important role to play is like the build out of these spaces and the design of these spaces to be usable for people, and to really look at how we create and recreate space that has been damaged, by disaster, to make it usable and useful and really resilient and sustainable. So I think there's a lot that we can do together on this front, and I'm really excited to start exploring those opportunities. And so, summing it all up, really, my office, the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination at FEMA, exists for one reason only: to ensure that we help people with disabilities before, during, and after disasters. We want to help do that by building a culture of preparedness, readying the nation for catastrophic disasters, and reducing the complexity of FEMA for people with disabilities. We want to deepen our engagement across our program areas within FEMA, and we want to deepen our engagement with our state and local, territorial, tribal partners, as well as our private sector partners like yourselves and our NGO partners. We want to help our partners make decisions based on data and real solid information rather than living in the world of anecdotes. And ultimately, we want to engage with partners like all of you because we know that together we can improve the lives of people with disabilities who've been impacted by disasters. Thank you very much for your time today, and now I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Linda. We really appreciate your time here this afternoon. This has been a fantastic webinar, and actually one of our best attended webinars. So I know our members and all supporters of good interior design are very much appreciative for your participation today. So with that, again, we will start to take questions. Please use your question box. And we'll start with a question there, and it says, does FEMA ODIC work to develop building and design standards like ANSI A117.1?
So that's a great question. We have not been as engaged as I would like with the codes and standards people, and we are starting to change that because we recognize that we can have some really meaningful impact there. So I've started to get some meetings with the International Code Council and with others engaged in that space to have input on those areas. Thanks for that question.
Great. Another question, how can interior designers get in touch with local offices to learn how to help before and after a disaster?
That is a great question. So there's a couple things that you can do. I guess there's really two pieces to it. You know, if you want to be engaged in the community sort of in a meaningful way in advance, then I urge you to connect with your local emergency management office and start having conversations with them. In terms of getting engaged in post-disaster efforts, there's a couple of things that you can do, especially if you're looking to engage with the Disability Integration Program in particular. We have 10 regional disability integration specialists around the country, and they are not only engaged in active disaster response, but they are working to develop stakeholder engagement and partnerships during what we call the blue sky time, or the non-disaster time, which of course is like 2 days a year. But those individuals, I think, would be great points of contact who could probably get you in touch with folks, you know, at that local ground level, and help you to engage. And I would be happy to send out the contact information for those 10 regional people, if that would be useful.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely, Linda. That would be fantastic if you could send that my way. Another question here. Does FEMA ODIC work with the U.S. Access Board?
Also a great question, and yes, we do. We meet with them regularly, and we've actually engaged with them to provide training and technical assistance as we're working in particular to build out this public assistance engagement. So we are coordinating very closely with them right now and hoping to work with them to develop a train the trainer, right, so that we will be able to get our public assistance staff in the field to a level of understanding of what the requirements of the ADA are as they're rebuilding these public spaces. So, and yeah, it's been a very successful partnership so far.
Great. Another question for you. How can FEMA and your office help promote universal design public community spaces prior to a disaster, whether under the auspices of preparedness or anything else?
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, and it's something that we are talking about constantly, and I think, that's one of the things that I see as sort of a natural fit between us and your partners, quite honestly, because there's really two pieces to this. There's promoting things during the non-disaster time, and then there's looking at rebuilding when you're post-disaster. But universal design isn't something that needs to wait for disaster, right? We should be and could be thinking about it all the time. And so I would welcome the opportunity to hear from any of your members on ways that we can advance that conversation and who we should be speaking to.
That's wonderful. Linda, again, this is Brian Sukup, Vice President of Government Affairs. We'd be happy to help facilitate that conversation.
Great.
Linda, we have another general question asking you to speak more about the personal property cap and DRA and what would be covered and not be covered and so forth. Okay.
So a couple keys about that, which I guess I didn't mention. First key is that the implementation goes back to August of 2017. So people that were impacted during Harvey, Irma, and Maria, who were eligible for that maximum grant of $34,000 and change, or I guess it was a little bit less during that season because it changes every year. But it went back to August of 2017. So there was an implementation process put into place for people backdating to that day. And then there's a process for going forward, right? And the initial iteration of things that are covered are broad categories of items that we recognize kind of leaves a lot on the table because the law doesn't specify categories or a particular list of items. So what is going to happen going forward is the process for determining whether, somebody has hit that max grant with the repair to their roof or whatever, and they still need a ramp or they need, their accessible bathroom was destroyed and they need that rebuilt, right? All of these kind of things would be exempt. So there is not an absolute list of this is covered, this is not, and I think the folks who are working on developing the policy and procedure around implementation recognize that there's a lot of gray area here because there's so many different, items and features and things to do with accessibility that are going to have to be dealt with. So I would expect to see, you know, a lot of shape shifting over time in what this is going to look like. And I think I would encourage some patience because I think we want to get it right, you know, and make sure that the intent of the law is carried out. And the intent is that people are not penalized for having a disability, right? And that, you know, accessibility related needs are covered. So whether that's, again, like, you know, durable medical, like a chair or a walker or whatever, or, you know, rebuild to your physical space, those are kind of the two different categories. And so I guess my best answer to that right now is more to come. You know, it's being developed as we speak. But I know that all of the potentially impacted people from the 2017 season were already identified and processed through. So I think now that, you know, the challenge is developing what the process is going to look like going forward. So I'm happy to update as I get more information.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Another question. What role might FEMA play with aging, specifically with continuing care retirement communities?
Yeah, that's also a really good question. And I think we have not done a ton of engagement in that area yet, right? And I think that's probably one of those places that we can really start to do better. And we saw sort of, you know, in the Puerto Rico recovery, again, for example, a very interesting mix of how people were housed and how elderly people were housed and things like that. And so I think each community is going to present different sort of unique challenges in terms of how, you know, their unique mix of housing and service provision. And so I think we need to do a little more work to identify kind of what is happening in different communities. And I think that's one of the pieces that having our individual working on stakeholder engagement and really getting down into that community level is going to help us leverage.
Great. I have a designer writing here. She says, I worked as a FEMA contractor during Harvey in Florida. I saw many people who did not have the mental capacity to do the forms. Have you considered neurologically diverse communities?
Yes. So to do the form, meaning the registration form, is that what I'm understanding the question to be?
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Yeah. So actually, glad that was brought up. So right now, you know, in addition to sort of reframing the registration question on disability, we are also adding front and center, you know, a better identification piece for people who need some assistance in filling out that application. We recognize that was a gap as well. And so we are working to include, you know, that question on the web app and that kind of thing, but also training the call center staff to have some of the skills, you know, to identify when someone's having trouble with answering questions and being able to direct them through how to, you know, more successfully engage with folks who are having difficulty, whether it's a learning difficulty, a psychiatric disability, a speech disability, you know, what have you. Yeah.
Great. Another question here. Does FEMA have statistics on the number of people who have died in federal disasters due to building or design failure?
That is a great question and one I don't have an answer to. I'd be happy to check into it.
Yeah, please. And if we can provide any assistance with that, we would be happy to.
Sure.
Rounding out the last few questions here, is there a special site for disabled individuals to register for FEMA?
No, there is no special site. Everybody can just register at disasterassistance.gov or on the FEMA app. Or, you know, there's also an 800 phone number where people can register, and those, I would say the bulk of people are registering online now, but of course that is dependent on people having network access, you know, in a disaster. But there is no special or separate line.
And just to remind everybody, if you have any questions, we do have a few more minutes. We have one left here. It says, for pre-planning, are the costs to have generators or other pre-disaster mitigation equipment installed, is that covered by FEMA?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
For pre-planning, are the costs to have generators or other, and it looks like a typo, in advance of the disaster covered by FEMA? So I guess, installing generators at nursing homes and those sorts of things pre-disaster, would those covered?
So there is pre-disaster mitigation grants, and I am not a grant expert, so I'd be happy to check more into sort of how the grant allocations work. But from what I understand, states and jurisdictions apply for grants, and then they figure out how they want to dole that money out in their communities. But I can certainly, again, get a more exact answer to give you a better answer to that question.
Great. And then the last question here is pretty general, but what can ASID do, at least as partially as a disability rights advocacy association, do to help FEMA in its work?
That is a wonderful question, and I think one of the things that would be really useful is just helping us get the word out about what we're doing. And, if we have more opportunities to do things like this and to really think about how we can, going back a few minutes, thinking about that whole universal design conversation and how we can sort of build that out and develop it and really, start presenting that. I think that would be really exciting. But I think, to the extent that you all can help us get the word out about who we are, what we're doing, and that we're here as a resource, not only to FEMA programs and services, but to our states, to our private sector partners like you, and to let's, be creative together and figure out ways to work together to really improve the lives of people with disabilities.
That's great. Thank you so much, Linda. And I can assure you we have plenty of interior designers on this call, more than 100 of them, and they are passionate about this subject, and they are ready to serve as a resource to you, to FEMA, to the federal government. So anything that you need from us, please let us know, and we are more than happy to help.
Thank you.
So thank you again, Linda. We're almost at the top of the hour, so that will conclude today's session. We again thank Linda and FEMA ODIC for hosting today's wonderful program. We look forward to hosting all of you on our next joint profession-wide public policy webinar in November. Additionally, on October 30th, ASID and IIDA will jointly host our next advocacy training webinar at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. All are welcome, so stay tuned for further details. We hope you enjoyed today's session and that you'll tell your colleagues and your chapter members about these webinars. And always remember, for up-to-the-minute advocacy and public policy updates, join our phone to action alert system by texting the term interior design to the number 52886. Again, that's texting the term interior design to the number 52886. Again, thank you so much, Linda. Thank you to all for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.